I'm excited that oration perfectly and impeccably as you did that. I don't think you missed anything out there, did you? I think so. I think you
I laughed over to the stage.
At the unveiling of the monument, the patriotic monument in National Monument in Rosscarbery, which was part of the proceedings, and he did an exemplary job then as he did now, so thank you. You can see now why that speech is given such a prominent place within, as it were, the canon of great Irish speech. In terms again of the funeral, the sheer scale of the funeral needs to be emphasised. Again, I repeat, this is the most hardline, the most recalcitrant of all the females. He is the one who, more than anyone else, is regarded as the enemy of Britain. This, of course, is happening in wartime. This is happening when many Irish nationalists have voluntarily entered the British Army, and which nationalist media, more centrist, constitutional nationalist media, are backing the war with increasing difficulty. The war is going catastrophically wrong at this point. The Western Front is stalemated. Gallipoli is turning into a monumental fiasco. And if anything, the Central Powers are winning on the Eastern Front. They are making gains in Poland. They are pushing Russia back, and of course Russia, before too long, will descend into anarchy, withdraw from the war, and Bolshevism. So the funeral comes at this incredibly important time, when opinion within Irish nationalism is already moving in the harder line direction. This is many months before the 1916 Rising. And one can have a look at many different examples of it. The defection of volunteers from the national volunteers to the Irish volunteers. The famous Ardèche, the centenary of which happened just a day or two ago, at which Douglas Hyde, one of the founders of the Gaelic League, is effectively ousted, and the Gaelic League moves in a more explicitly separatist direction. And the funeral puts the capstone on the whole thing. You have hundreds of thousands of people turning out in the streets of Dublin. The best guess is about 20,000 people in the cortege, about 5,000 to 6,000 volunteers and citizen army, and practically every organisation in nationalist Ireland, every city council, every borough council, every county council, every pool or guardian, all nationalised are there. And of course the vast majority of these bodies are dominated by the Home Rule Party, yet they feel obliged or want to be in this funeral. And I think, in terms of...
Sorry, could you just be a little bit? Could you explain the assassination of 10 fellows? Why? Could you give us a bit more detail?
Could I come back to that just at the end?
Yeah, okay, that's great.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that the leadership at the IRB looked at the scale of the turnout and said the people are with us. The next time this is going to happen, the guns are going to be loaded. The next time we have an event on this scale, it's going to be the Rising itself. So there is this very significant historical question as to what the leaders of the Rising thought the public reaction would be. Based on the turnout of O'Donovan Rossa's funeral, I think there is no doubt that they sincerely believe that public opinion would back them. Arguably, perhaps even more important than the funeral itself in terms of the link with the 1916 Rising, is the extent to which the funeral marked, in effect, a rapprochement, if not a complete reconciliation between the Fenian movement and the Catholic Church. Historically, the relations between the two have been very hostile. The Church regarded the Fenian movement pretty much the same way it regarded Italian nationalism as a threat to the Church, and they regarded republicans in Ireland the same way they regarded republicanism as France, as the antithesis of Catholic values. On a number of occasions, Fenians have been denied church funerals. O'Donovan Rossa, by contrast, is given pretty much a state funeral by the church before the state even exists. It is one of the great, the Catholic Church just brings its entire ceremonial to bear on the funeral. The funeral itself is proceeding to the Pope Cathedral, and it's then subsequently removed to the Mansion House because the organisers want the maximum number of people to see the body for publicity effect. But if one has a look at the number of clergy, for example, participating in the cortege, you have pretty well every major Catholic religious body, male and female, participating, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, tensions still remain between the Catholic Church and, as it were, the advanced Republican movement. But if, as I believe, one of the key conditions for any sort of successful independent struggle, which did take place a few years later, was that that hostility had to be dismantled, one cannot overstate the significance of that funeral in at least furthering that project. And of course, we also have a number of other very prominent funerals taking place over the following years, as indeed we will have a number of very important centenaries of these funerals happening in the coming years. Thomas Ashe, the hunger striker, dies in 1917. The people in Kerry are all already making plans to make sure that that funeral is marked. Kevin Barry and the others who were executed by the British under the Restoration of Order in Ireland. In Cork, the two Lords Mayor, Thomas McCurtain and Terence McSweeney. And then during the Civil War, people like Michael Collins and so on and so forth. So from an organisational point of view, the O'Donovan Rossa funeral, as it were, sets the standard for the great political funerals that were to follow. So this is the committee. Now, I won't go into it. But look who you have. Arthur Griffith, Eamon Kent, Sean Curry, future President of Ireland, James Connolly, Wilma Hobson, founder of the Irish, technically founder of the Irish Army team. Stephen Jones, a hugely significant figure in the link between Ireland and America. Moving down, Major McBride, one of the Boers who was executed in 1916, who had been fighting the British in the Boer War. Joseph Plunkett, Owen McNeill, Porrick Pierce, Thomas MacDonald, Joseph Plunkett, the O'Reilly, Eamon de Valera, Eamon Daly, Eamon Cant, James Connolly again, moving out, Charles Kickham, the famous novelist. Many figures here who had been out in the lockout of 1913. Tom Clark. You have the entire executive of commemoration, including, of course, every Pole's favourite aristocrat, Irish aristocrat, Countess Markievicz, or Makiewicz. And then through we have Cathal Brewer there in the end. It is a unique gathering. For the Poles here, those names may mean something. For the Irish people here, those names will mean an awful lot. This is a huge proportion of the elite that was to drive through the independent struggle and to govern Ireland for the first years. And this is where they really come together in a structured way for the first time. Okay, moving on now. I'm very conscious of the passage of time, and as always, I'm speaking too long. Moving on now to the commemoration that has been taking place. The thing that those, when we were discussing amongst those interested parties in West Cork, how should we approach the centenary? I mean, what should be done? How should it be characterised? We decided one very important thing first, which is that you get your principles in order first, and then you make your plans afterwards. Get your principles right, and then make sure that the plans are consistent with those principles. So what should the principles be? Well, we made a simple decision. The principles of the commemoration should be the principles of O'Donovan Rossa himself. How else would you commemorate O'Donovan Rossa except by embedding his principles into the very DNA of the commemorative programme? So what were those principles? Well, there were many. So we'll just have a look at the most important. The vital one, the one that underpins everything else and explains everything else, was that it had to be republican. Now, in a republic, the term republican should simply be a synonym for citizen. In Ireland, of course, it is more complicated than that. There are a variety of definitions, a variety of understandings of the term republican. So which one do you take? Well, we took our principles from Abraham Lincoln, his Gettysburg Address. Republicanism, in a nutshell, is government of the people, by the people, for the people. That was the keystone, that was the fundamental principle by which everything that we did had to be judged. It had to therefore be bottom up. The commemoration had to be community-led. It could not be a top-down sort of structured commemoration. It had to be, as it were, organic and community-based. It had to be, as it were, a commemoration of a republican in a republican way, republican in aim and method. And that is the thing which was absolutely the thing that we were agreed on. One small little point, which was sort of a point of comment, at the last ceremony of the programme yesterday in Rosscarbery, where we had the unveiling of the O'Donovan Rossa stamp, O'Donovan Rossa's great-grandson was invited to say a few words, and he said that in his view, Paul Pierce's graveside oration was Ireland's equivalent of the Gettysburg Address. And I went, yes, we hadn't briefed him on this, and I simply said, look, and that is exactly the principle upon which we have based the entire commemorative program. The second principle, mirroring O'Donovan Rossa's principles, was that it had to be independent. It could not have any direct institutional affiliation. It could not be subordinate to anything or anybody. And especially we would be determined to make sure that it would not become the property of any political party. Everybody was welcome, regardless of their political affiliation, so long as you left that affiliation at the door. And we're delighted to see that sort of people from all political parties, Fine Gael, Labour, Sinn Féin, etc., were part of the programme. Hans was entirely right, because again, thinking back to the organising committee of the funeral, all modern political parties in Ireland had somebody on that organising committee. In fact, most of them had several people on that organising committee. So it was entirely appropriate we should have that. It had to be voluntary. O'Donovan Rossa did what he did voluntarily. Nobody forced him to do it. He did it entirely voluntarily of his own volition. And we therefore said that everybody who's participating in this must do so voluntarily. There's not going to be any payment for anybody for doing what you do. It for the good of the event, for basic, simple, patriotic motives. And the response has been mind-blowing in terms of the willingness of people of West Cork to become engaged. It has just been awe-inspiring to see, if you pitch it at that pure level, the patriotism, which is of course a concept that is much abused and much mocked, it's incredible to see the power that can have in terms of, even now, in this jaded age, encouraging people to participate. And of course we were also playing into the idea of the volunteers themselves. Volunteerism is thankfully a very powerful force in Irish society even now, things like the GAA and so on and so forth. So we wanted to make sure that we kept that, and I think we've succeeded. It had to be international. O'Donovan Rossa was somebody who did not think of Ireland first and last at home. His view was exactly counter to that. His view that Ireland was one of a number of countries, including Poland, which were subject to unfair foreign domination. And that therefore there had to be an international program. I'll come back to the form of that, but it's in that context that the March in Skibbereen is located. And finally, it had to be ambitious. O'Donovan Rossa had the most monumentally insane ambition imaginable in his lifetime. He believed that the smallest, weakest, most irrelevant part of the greatest empire the world has ever seen could win its independence through its own efforts. Now that is the very quintessence of ambition. And so we said, if we sincerely honour the memory of O'Donovan Rossa, we have to be ambitious ourselves. So we have to organise a very large number of high-quality events. Now, the fact that we didn't have two halfpennies to run together was a bit of a handicap. But again, if you can get that, you can get that. It is just one small little item. There was an item of the programme where a significant outlay had to be undertaken. There was a local company that did something. And when the time came for payment, the company was approached and they said, we don't want it. This is our contribution to the commemorative programme. And the amount of money that was involved was not insignificant. And it's an indication of the extent to which companies, businesses, organisations, groups got involved. It was really striking. And ambitious, in effect, in the commemorative programme, reinstate the spirit of O'Donovan Rossa himself and try to make West Cork a little bit better place by so doing. So preliminary points. We have these coordinations. We've coordinated with New York. There are a large number of organisations, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, the Ladies' Ancient Order of Hibernians, the New York Consulate, the American Irish Historical Society, New York University, the Catholic University of America, the North American Board of the GAA. So we liaise with them all because New York organised their commemorative programme. They organised their commemorative programme leading up to the centenary of his death on the 29th of June. We then took over for July and we hand the baton on to Glasnevin tomorrow. And in West Cork itself there were 4 major locations, and these are in increasing size of town rather than of prestige. Green is minuscule, Roscarbery is not particularly big, Skibbereen is slightly bigger, and Clonakilty is a little bit bigger again. What we were also trying to do is, and again this is where the ambition came in, that what we wanted to do was to provide a template by which similar commemorations over the coming years could be undertaken, both sort of to mark locally and nationally the Easter Rising commemoration, and also subsequently the role of Cork and Corkonians in the struggle for independence over the centuries over the coming 5 to 6 years. So this is the programme. I haven't got copies of the actual diary of events, but I can supply that. Of course, they're now over. So. But all of these headings match the headings of the official state programme. So there is a ceremonial element to the state programme. There's a community, there's an education, artistic, and where the diasporic strand. Ceremonial, we struck gold. President Higgins was coming to Cork, to Skibbereen anyway, to open the West Cork Art Centre. So we asked him, would he double up and use the occasion to open the programme, which he did on the 11th of June. And then, of course, tomorrow will be the final ceremonial event, the really big one. In terms of community organisations, community events, we had a GAA tournament. There was an incredibly moving mass at which just huge congregation, and just before mass started, you know, you always get this sort of silence descending. And the opening bars of Misha Era, if you want to read this, comes called Misha Era, start coming over the tango. Again, for Polish people, you might not understand the significance of that music, but it is regarded as the great Irish schools, and it was made the hairs on my neck. Unveiling of new monuments in Roscarbery in particular, refurbishment of old monuments, and we also had a College Cork, the organisation which promotes traditional Irish music, had a concert in Skibbereen. In terms of the educational elements, the history magazine History Ireland held one of its very enjoyable hedge schools, where they have a sort of slightly informal format where you bring a number of academics in and there's a sort of interaction between the academics and the audience. I organised an academic conference at which we had a number of very distinguished speakers, including Professor Michael Laffin of UCD. We liaised with local schools to organise various competitions. We also liaised with the county library service for an exhibition which started in Skibbereen, moved to Clonakilty, and which we're hoping will move on to the other libraries in County. It's a fantastic little exhibition. On the artistic strand, we had the play on O'Donovan Rossa's life, which we'll be coming back to later on. And we also had the unveiling of new artwork by Robert Ballard, and foolishly I forgot to include an image of that. That's being launched, I think it's in Glasnevin tomorrow at 5:30. It is stunning. I mean, it is a really stunning piece of work. It is the famous Greyside scene, but instead of being in black and white, it is in colour, and done in Robert Ballard's very distinctive style. For those who don't know, Robert Ballard is Ireland's most famous living artist. The print is a fundraiser. He has done the original painting. The print copies, which are numbered and signed by the artist, have been sold to fundraise for the refurbishment of a monument to 1916 in Glasnevin. So it's a very worthy cause. In terms of Irish language and whatever, we have Irish language elements to practically all of the events. And we've also had specific, exclusively Irish language evenings in Rena Screen and Clonakilty, and in Skibbereen also. The diasporic strand I've already mentioned, where we were very keen, and we've established very fruitful ties with Irish America, which are going to come in very handy for next year and for the future years. But this is the one I'm proudest, of which I'm most proud. The government has not found a way of, as it were, marketing 1916 for the new Irish communities, for the immigrant communities that have come into Ireland over the last 10 years. They haven't quite found a way to do it. we did. That parade in Skibbereen, which we'll be coming back to in a few minutes, and I have to confess, I was looking to promote the Polish angle, but I'll say that in here. But it isn't artificial, it is very sincere, and I'll be showing how it is in a few minutes. So, in terms of the programme, we have everything that the state is doing, and more. We actually found a particular way of doing something that the state has not yet managed to do. This is the logo that was created. The red is designed for Cork. Of course, you have the trifle in the background. This is the phoenix emblem, the name in Irish, and this is the relatively few. There are very few pictures of the man, of course, because of his lifetime. Didn't really coincide with photography, but we have some etchings, and that's one of him, basically in his prime. Okay, moving on now to the main item on the agenda, and again I'm very conscious of time, the Polish dimension. I want to look at just some of, as it were, the ways in which this Polish dimension influenced O'Donovan Rossa's thinking. To begin with, as it were, a thing which both illustrates in his mind the manipulation of history which is common to both jurisdictions, but which also indicates perhaps something a little bit more profound. This is an extract from his Rossa's recollections. Many lessons were in the school books of my day, but not in the school books of today. The exile of Erin was in the third book of my day. It isn't in any of the books today. The downfall of Poland, in which Freedom shrieked as Kosciuszko fell, was in one of the books in my day. It isn't in any of the books today. England is eliminating from those Irish national school books every piece of reading that would tend to nurse the Irish youth into a love of country or a love of freedom. And she is putting into them pieces that would make the Irish children pray to God to make them happy English children. Now note, the downfall of Poland is equated with the exile of Erin. I mean, the two poems are regarded as being equivalent in terms of their effect, which is the elimination of love of country. Now, I know a small number of people here attended a talk I gave last year to mark the 35th anniversary of the foundation of the Irish Polish Society. And we had to look at how that particular poem, The Downfall of Poland, was, as far as I can see, was almost compulsory for many Irish children in the 19th century. Just to give two examples.